Okay. So first of all, if anybody needs, I had a couple of these left at home. These are the Ohr Somayach Gemara companions. If anybody needs, guys, if anybody needs these are 20 shekels each. But no pressure. Do not feel any pressure to buy them. And hopefully I'll find some other way to support my family. So they're available. I only have a few copies left. I spoke to the guy to get a reprint. So hopefully we'll get that done. Okay. Now, so we want to talk a little more about the Kohanim. The first thing is, yesterday we were speaking about the obligation to honor Kohanim, and all of you envious non-Kohanim.
Well, what about the ones that are Kohanim?
Yeah, but there aren't too many. I try to keep it limited around here so that I get all the. Are you a Kohen?
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
You are?
Yeah, why would I make that up?
So get out.
Hilly too?
Yeah, we got a couple. All right, so I'll tell you an interesting shaila that I asked. I asked a certain rabbi years ago. It was Erev Sukkot. I don't know if you guys have been in Israel on Sukkot, but often people buy their lulav in the esrog, and then you go to check with a rabbi to find out if it's, either if it's kosher, or if you know it's kosher, is it what we call mahuder? Like, is it grade A? Can we turn on the air, please? Is it grade A? Is it what's called mahuder? Is it top notch, or sometimes people want for sukkahs, you want to make sure that you got it, and only an expert could tell you what level it is. So it was my first or second year. I think my second year I was married, and there was a long line by the rabbi where I'm standing there with my little Vanessa. There's a long line. There were two guys ahead of me in line, former friends of mine. Were standing. It was a long line. These two guys were standing right there, former friends, and I said to these guys, while you're waiting in line, to find out if your lulav and esrog are mahuder, maybe you want to fulfill a Torah command of v'kidashto, of honoring the Kohen and letting me go ahead of you in line. So they declined my generous offer. And then when I got into the rabbi's my upstairs neighbor, by the way, when I got into the Rav, so I asked him if according to halacha they should have let me go ahead in line. He gave me a very interesting answer. He said no, because to give up your time is like giving up your money. And unfortunately, you are not obligated to give a Kohen your money. What that means is if you're walking with a Kohen and the two of you hit the door at the same time, so then you should honor the Kohen to let him go through. It's an insignificant, it takes 1 second to let him go ahead of you. But if you're at giving up 10 minutes of your time, that you're not obligated to do, because 10-minute time is money. So there's a limit on it. There is. I'll get to you in a second, Shay. There is a limit on it, on what you have to do. Now, when we spoke about the food, even the food platter, we spoke yesterday that you have to let a Kohen take first. But if that's going to cost you in real terms, meaning, let's say there's a platter of chicken, there's one last piece of dark meat, and the rest of it is white meat. And if you give it to the Kohen first, he'll take the dark meat. Certainly, if it's me sitting at the table. And that you're not obligated to, because that's an objective loss for you. If they're all the same cuts of meat, then you should let the Kohen take first. That's halacha. Yeah, Shai, what we're going to ask?
So we actually had a situation with the Shabbos that I caused, where we were all waiting in line for washing our hands, and I went to ask one of the Ravs, as a Kohen, if I should be allowed to go first, because I was at the back of the line, and then he said yes. And then I used that, but I should not have done it.
I don't know who the Rav is. I don't want to know who the Rav is, but my Rav said that if it's giving up a certain, like I said, two guys hit the fountain at the same time, you let the Kohen go first. But if it's a long line of people, to let a guy, they're taking up everybody's time, not necessarily. Not necessarily. When I was in day school, this is one of those moments in life I'd like to take back. I wish I could do again. We were in 8th grade. One guy, we were playing ball outside, we came in hot and sweaty, and we're all standing at the drinking fountain, and this one guy at the back of the line, he didn't feel like waiting, so he just goes, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu b'cholam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. So we're all a bunch of little goobers, so we didn't want to, now there's a hefsek, and so we all moved so he could get his drink, because we didn't want to go to Gehenna. But, if I could do that again, if I could relive that moment, I would have just said, I would have also just gone, yeah, now what? Now we're both in the same boat. So I lost. But at the end of the day, that you're not obligated to give up time. That you can't, they can't do it. By the way, that applies to lines in general. If you're waiting in line, let's say at the bank, and the guy says to you, "Can I cut in front of you?" The answer to that is you have to ask everybody in this line. You could switch places with somebody in line, because then you're not taking up everybody. If you're third and he's fifth, so you could switch places. Now you be fifth and he'll be third, because then you're not taking up somebody's time. But to let somebody cut in, now all those people behind him, now that you're taking up, you're not allowed to do that. And my son just told me recently, somebody asked him for cuts in a certain line, and he said to him, "I'm okay with it. Just ask all the other people in line," which means no, because they're not going to let you. They're not going to let you. I once had that in a bank. I was in front. There was one lady in front of me and one lady behind me. So the lady in front of me turned around. The lady in front of me, she said to me, "Do you mind letting that lady cut in front of you? She's in a hurry." So I said, "I got a better idea. Why don't you and her switch places?" Then she goes, "Well, okay, I thought you wanted to do chesed." Right. Then she said to me, "I thought you lay guilt." I said, "Well, you can do chesed also." She said, "I did chesed today already." So I said to her, "Yeah, but the Mishnah says there's no end to chesed that you could do." Right? And then my wife gave me over the head when I came home. My wife gave it to me. She said, "You should have just let her go ahead of you. You should have let the lady go ahead of you." She said, don't be so smart. Just be nice and let the lady go ahead of you." Right? So I got it for my lack of chesed. Right? That's the punishment in this world. In any event, my wife's approach was always just say yes. Just say yes. She said, I said yes. Right? When I said, "Do you want to get married?" She said yes. So because she said yes, so now I got to say yes the rest of my life. That's the price you pay. Besides the fact that she asked for 400 shekels this morning. Got to make Shabbos. Yeah, and then you wonder why my blood pressure is up. Yeah, okay. In any event, now I'll tell you a couple of interesting things. First of all, when you're a Kohen, not when you're a Kohen, because you're never going to be, but I'll tell you what Kohen you have to be careful of. Number one, hospitals. To go into a hospital in Israel, the halacha is, I'm not going to don't ask me the details of that, I'm just telling you, to go into a hospital, the problem is that the halacha says, if there is a dead body, and you're under the same roof as a dead body, it's tumah. You become tameh. So a Kohen, to go into a hospital, ironically in America it's easier than Israel, because a non-Jewish body, the concern of being in the same room there's not the same level of tumah. Whereas to come into contact with the body is a problem. In Israel, with a Jewish body, you can't even be under the same roof. And that means that the whole hospital, the chances that somebody in a hospital has died or will imminently die is great, and therefore you can't enter a hospital unless you know for a fact that nobody in the hospital died. Just hold for a few minutes. So in Israel, the hospitals in Israel actually have a sign at the entrance of the Kohen whether Kohanim could enter or not. And so Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, if you've ever seen the sign over there, it says sometimes, if there's no sign, you could go in. But if somebody passes away, until they remove the body, which takes about an hour, so the sign will say, K'tisah L'Kohanim Asura. Now, my wife once gave birth, and I went to the hospital with my kids to visit her. I was with 2 boys and 1 girl. We got to the hospital, Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, and the sign said you can't go in. My daughter was allowed to go in because the laws don't apply to the girls. So she was allowed to go in, and I had to stay outside. My boys at the time were under bar mitzvah, but you still have to watch them, so we stayed outside. And I wasn't that upset about it because I felt my boys are experiencing firsthand that you're a Kohen and there are rules. I wasn't so upset about that. But you have to check. And the other hospitals also have, some are more reliable, some are less reliable, the supervision on it. But Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Israel, in America, is less of a problem because you could follow, if somebody did die in a hospital, you could assume it's from the majority, which is not Jewish in the hospital, unless it's a very Jewish hospital. Here, there are actually people in the Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital, there are actually people who rely on the fact that there's so many Arabs in the hospital that if somebody died, it may very well have been an Arab who died, then they have less of a problem being under the same roof. That's what I like. Quick question. Avi, what are you going to ask?
Yeah, I was going to ask, maybe you might have just answered it just now, but I was going to say, Yerushalayim is a very old city, and probably a good chance that maybe we're walking over some ancient graves, since there's like so
Good.
many layers of history.
That's a good question.
Are
That-
we-
that's a good question. So he's asking, what about the fact that we're in a city that has been destroyed and rebuilt 9 times, and chances are you're walking over graves. So if you don't know for a fact that there are graves, you don't have to worry about it. But there are areas, as this often happens when they want to build, they start digging and they come across graves. And then they have to determine, are these Jewish graves? And therefore you can't touch the bones and move the bones. And often you see protests because they're building and they find bones. And then the Asher Kadisha comes out, the protesters come out. You can't move, you're not allowed to move bones for the sake of building a building. That's only if you know for a fact that there are graves there. Now, if you guys are going up to Tzfas and Meron, you're going to be in Tzfas. There is an ancient cemetery in Tzfas, which they have now tried to mark off. Going to Meron is problematic for Kohanim, and they're constantly upgrading where you can go, where Kohanim could stand relative to where the grave is. My brother was once, when he was in Yeshiva, they went to Tzfas, and the Yeshiva went into the ancient cemetery in Tzfas, and my brother and his friend sat down on a bench while everybody went in, but then it turned out it wasn't a bench, it was a poorly marked tombstone. Yeah, that's bad. So they had to get out of there. In general, Kohanim do not go to cemeteries because you're going to be within 4 amos. There are certain cemeteries where there are access roads for the Kohanim, so you can at least look at the grave. I was when my grandmother passed away, so we were on an access road. We could see down, but we couldn't get near it. But we could see where it is because there was an access road there for Kohanim. Okay, I don't want to go into the details of the halachas now. It's a massive subject. I don't want to go into. I'm just giving you a thumbnail sketch of what Kohanim have to know. There's another area where Kohanim, and this is because it becomes more practical, is when it comes to flying to Israel. And one of the reasons it's a problem is because airlines transport bodies. Now, there are problems with the airports, and I have to check. Years ago, there was a certain airline called Tower Air, which did not bring bodies, so we used to fly on Tower Air. Or we could fly on the non-Jewish carriers that do not bring bodies. The problem is El Al does bring bodies, and depending on what city they're coming from, there's a better than 50% chance that there will be a body. Then a coin is absolutely forbidden to be on that plane. According to some poskim, there are poskim who say that the way the plane is structured and for certain technical reasons, and the coffin has a gap which prevents the ritual, the tuma, from penetrating outward. There are leniencies for certain poskim give. In general, I don't abide by those leniencies. We have to check. Now, in the old days, I would actually call the airlines. When I was flying El Al, I would call cargo to find out if there are bodies on the plane scheduled for that evening. I was actually once flying out of England, and see what happens is I want to know as much in advance as possible, because if there's a body, then I can start making alternative plans. So my wife and I, with 2 kids, we once got bounced coming from back to Israel. We had to fly from Columbus to New York, and I called up from Columbus. They said, can't get on that plane. And since that time, we stopped flying that route. When I was coming from England, I called cargo on El Al, and I asked the guy answers the phone. It was about 6 hours before the flight. I called up and said, do you know of any bodies on tonight's plane? He says, no. I called up again about 2 hours later. He said, no. And I called up a third time. I said, are there any bodies on tonight's plane? He said to me, yes, 200 bodies, all of them alive. Because he had about enough of me. And since then, now the last trip, for example, El Al has a flight out of Newark, which is guaranteed a no-body flight. That's the Kohanim flight. So when I fly from the United States, I go to Newark on the way back, and I fly on, I fly out of Newark, or I take, like on this last trip, I just flew with United, and there was no concern at all. There's another problem, and this you've probably read about or heard about, and this goes back to this is going back about 20 years. There was a Baal Tshuva who was a pilot, and he was attending a shir. And the rabbi said that there's a concept in the Gemara of a box over a cemetery, and the tuma of the cemetery goes up and everything in the box becomes tameh. And he gave an example. He said, in our day and age, it would be an example of a plane flying over a cemetery. So the pilot said, well, he flies for El Al, And when El Al takes off, when they hit 800 meters, they fly over the cemetery in Cholon, which means that Kohanim cannot be on that plane. It takes the 20 seconds to fly over the cemetery, but they can't be on the plane because you're going to become Tameh. So they contacted the Ministry of Transportation about rerouting the planes, and they said it's not our issue, it's the military. So they contacted the military. I spoke to one of the Knesset members, Rabbi Ravitz, who actually lives in my parents' building, and he said they contacted the military. They said it's not our issue, it's the Ministry of Transportation. So they got ping pong back and forth. Okay, so then they said they rerouting the planes. There were activists that actually stood in the cemetery watching, and they said no, they have not been rerouted. Eventually, they did reroute, and then it became permissible for Kohanim to fly. Now, we had an Ohr Somayach event in the United States at that time that I had to get to, and to get out of the country usually the problem is getting into the country. To get out of the country became a problem. So they said that the 747s at night do not fly over the cemetery because of the noise, the neighborhood, whatever it was. So I booked on a 747. Now there's a problem because there were Kohanim who did not necessarily, while this issue was going on, by the way, there were guys from Israel who had to get back, it was right before Pesach, there were guys, Kohanim from Israel, who took boats to Cyprus and then got on a regular carrier from Cyprus because they had to get home for Pesach. It was a very big problem. To get to England, there were no flights that were rerouted. They were all going over to cemeteries. So the Kohanim had a problem. Now, there's a halacha, you're not going to believe it, this is why truth is stranger than fiction. There is a halacha that if you're inside a closed container, inside the box, which is over the cemetery, then you're protected from the tumah. Now, there were Kohanim that decided they're going to use this halachic option. The problem is, where can you get a closed container to be sitting on a plane while it's flying over a cemetery? Well, there is something called body bags. So there are actually Kohanim who got on the plane, and on takeoff, they closed themselves into a body bag. There's a picture, a famous picture, you can find it online. There's a picture of this Hasidic guy sitting there. He's in a plastic bag that's completely sealed, airtight, as they fly over the cemetery. So I'll get to you what's that. That is what the raw halacha says. There was only a question whether a plastic bag counts as an actual kli, as an actual utensil. But there were Kohanim that did this. Now, I had to fly out of the country, and I was worried to get to this event. I was worried because if at the last minute they switch planes, sometimes that happens, planes switch, and it's not a 747, so then the 727 or whatever it is will fly over the cemetery. So I decided I'm going to bring a plastic bag just in case. If they switch planes, I'll get myself into a body bag on takeoff. Mrs. Kaplan said, no, you won't. Because she said to me that whatever you're worried about, creating a panic on an airplane. Can you imagine you're sitting on a plane and suddenly some guy is wrapping himself up in a bag? My wife said to me, whatever Aveira you're worried about flying, this is going to be a bigger Aveira, besides the fact that all security may shoot you. And therefore you're not going to do that. So I sent a fax to the CEO of El Al asking for administrative permission to put myself in a bag on takeoff in case this actually did. So I get a CEO, Mr. Kaplan, you may not do anything that jeopardizes the security. You may only say your security. You have to sit seatbelted like a good boy. So I didn't do it, and they didn't switch the place. I made it out of the country, but it was a halachic concern. Now, 1 second. There's another concern. You're not going to believe this. Israel has what's called a new Terminal 3. They used to have Terminal 1. And Terminal 3, when they finally built it, originally, those of you who ever came to Israel with Terminal 1, you went into the terminal and there was a bus that took you out to the plane. And when the plane landed, the bus brought you to the terminal because they didn't have sleeves. So in this country, every time this happens, whenever you wonder, why don't they have a sleeve? Must be security. That's the answer for everything. If there's a traffic jam, security. No, not always. They built Terminal 3 and they do have a sleeve. Now, the problem becomes that when a plane for the United States lands, listen to this, plane from the United States lands, and the sleeve goes out and connects to the plane, if there's a body on the plane, the way the halacha works is that the impurity, the tumah, immediately knocks out the entire airport. So now Kohanim is a problem. If you're in the airport when a plane lands with the body and they connect up the sleeve, so you've just knocked out the entire airport. So they spoke to Rabbi Elyashiv. I have a friend of mine who is very involved in Kohen, all Kohen questions. I call him. He's not even a Kohen, and he's written a book on it. He's an activist. He's very involved in all of Israel. Whenever I have to travel, I ask him what airlines, what airports could I use, because there are problems that are constantly developing. And he told me that, for example, on my last trip to England, he said I could fly to Heathrow Airport on the way, but can't leave from Heathrow Airport. But I could go to Luton Airport, because from Luton Airport, the planes never bring bodies. The guy knows everything about it. So he went to Rabbi Elyashiv with his partner, and Rabbi Elyashiv said the way they have to do it is the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, they have to have the remote control on the sleeve. And when the plane lands, they take the body off the plane first, then connect the last section of the sleeve to the plane, then there's no problem because the body's off the plane already. So with the first plane in from New York at the new airport was an El Al plane that was bringing a body. And remember, it's very common because people want to be buried in Israel. And they were there and they watched, and the Chevra Kadisha did it, and at that point Rabbi Elyashiv said there's no problem because it's functioning properly. And so these are some of the issues that Kohanim run into, which most people are clueless. They have no idea what's going on. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, like, overall, aren't we already in a state of impurity? Like,
Yes.
like the whole generation, everybody.
We're all considered impure, but like I said yesterday, we still have to avoid, there are two things. There's the prohibition and there's what happens as a result. So the fact that a let's say a man commits adultery and the woman gets pregnant and there's going to be a mamzer now. So now they can continue living together because after all, she's already pregnant. So you're not going to make more pregnant. No, there's a prohibition of adultery, and there's what the result of adultery creates a mamzer. For the Kohen, it's a prohibition every time he comes into contact with ritual impurity, whether or not he's impure. Wait, there are two stages here.
Because I was also going to ask, like, can't you just, if this accidentally happens, can't you just go to the mikveh?
No. The only way now when you cut tumas mace, ritual impurity with, I'll get to you one second, but tumas mace, ritual impurity with the dead body, the only way to get out of it is the ashes of the red cow, which we don't have nowadays. That's why none of us are allowed on the Temple Mount, because we're all considered impure, and you're not allowed to go onto the Temple Mount in a state of impurity. Yeah, Ben, go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, what would Rebbe do if after he checked in 6 hours, 3 hours, 1 hour before the flight, and there was a body? Like, would Rebbe have just canceled his
What
flight?
would I do, or what should I do?
What would Rebbe? Because I feel like it can't. Be
What would I do is
hundreds of
what would
dollars.
I personally do is immaterial, because maybe I'm not that. Maybe I'm not that.
What
There.
should a person
What
do?
should have? The question is always what. A guy once asked me. We were talking about the laws, which we're going to talk about in a little while, about giving up your life rather than doing an avera. So a guy said to me, "Would you do it?" So I said to him, "What would I do? I don't know. I hope I don't face that test. What should I do? That's what the question is. What should you do? You'd have to cancel. The halacha is you have to give up all your money and not transgress even one avera.
Then maybe Rebbe shouldn't even ask. Just make sure you don't.
There
You're under a stadless 6 hours before. Don't check.
There are those that say that there are different opinions about what your limits are. There's one place where when you call cargo, when you call the Chevra Kadisha, the head of the Chevra Kadisha won't tell you, because he feels the halacha is that you've done the most you can. Since I'm not telling you, you're okay. You can just get on the plane. That's his approach. Exactly his approach.
Is the Avera on the
Similarly for
Hever
routes,
Kadisha then?
like maybe if
It's not an avera. He holds it's not an avera. The job of the coin is to check. The coin, it's what's called eno efshar. He can't determine it. Therefore, not everybody agrees with that. Everybody agrees with that. That's his approach. But
similarly for plane routes, if you don't know you're passing over a cemetery.
that's not. You don't have to check out what's the plane route. They're not going to tell you any way you want to understand. Somebody did bring up to Rabbi Elyashiv, now that you bring it up, somebody mentioned to Rabbi Elyashiv, when you fly into New York, in New York there are about 40 Jewish cemeteries. And what if the plane is flying over Jews on the way into New York? Rabbi Elyashiv said, don't look for trouble. Don't look for problems. You don't have to go digging, no pun intended. You have to go digging and looking for problems. There are enough problems without digging and looking for it. This problem came to the fore because this guy happened to be at a shiur and he heard the guy say it. That's what.
I've flown a few times and I never checked this. And then when I came to
Yeah, they live and learn. That's what yeshiva is for.
So who do I call, or who do I go to?
You'll ask me, I'll give you a number afterwards. Okay. That's as far as it. Now, there's another halacha here I want to talk about. Now, this is what the main one I want to get to today. Skip ahead to Perek Chav Beis, Pasuk Lamed Beis, 22:32. So here the Torah says, this applies to all of us, boys. This applies to all of us. I mean, there are benefits. You know, we do the redemption of the firstborn. That's money. That's cash. 22:32 is on page 680. Okay. So the Torah at the bottom of the page, and this is a fundamental. Ushmarta mitzvosai vasisa mosam. You should keep my mitzvahs and do them. This is following up various halachas. Ani Hashem. V'lo sechalalu es shem kodshi. Do not desecrate my name. 680, last line. V'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. I should be sanctified among the Jewish people. Ani Hashem mekadishchem. And this is the halacha that's you've heard the concept of a chilul Hashem and a kiddush Hashem. And this is where the Torah says you are not allowed to make a chilul Hashem. You must make a kiddush Hashem. Now, hold all the questions. Let me just cover this topic, then I'll take all the questions. The basic mitzvah here is that if a Jew is in a situation where the halacha requires him to give up his life, he must give up his life, and if he does not, it is a chilul Hashem. So for example, the anti-Semite pulls a gun and says, bow down to the idol or I will kill you. The Jew has an obligation to give up his life. The three main averas, idol worship, immorality, and murder, a Jew has to give up his life rather than transgress. If he does not give up his life, it is a chilul Hashem. Now, he is not liable for the death penalty because it was under duress. But he didn't do what the halacha obligated him to do. If he does give up his life, then it's a kiddush Hashem. Then he's sanctified God's name. That's level 1. Level 2 is not behaving in a way that at your level creates a chilul Hashem without having given up your life. For example, if a frum person, the more that a frummer a person looks, the more he's expected of him. So if a frum man starts hollering at somebody in public, that could be a chilul Hashem, depending on who he is. The Gemara says, one of the Amoraim said, for me to go 4 amos, I think it was Rabbi Yochanan, to go 4 amos without somebody seeing me, walk around without tefillin and without studying Torah, for me that's a chilul Hashem. Because they expect that from him. For a guy at Ohr Somayach to now go 4 amos without tefillin, that wouldn't be a chilul Hashem, because not Rabbi Yochanan. For me, it's not a chilul Hashem, not Rabbi Yochanan. But for a person, depending on your level, and your level, and remember, we are constantly under scrutiny. When I was in Kollel, the head of the Kollel said that if we ever get on a bus, we're young Kollel guys, if we ever get on a bus, and there's anybody standing on the bus, even regarding if it's any secular Jew, standing, regardless of his age, we should not sit. Because that secular Jew is going to look around the bus and he's going to say, why is the frum guy sitting and I'm standing? And we have to be very, very conscientious of this, because we are under constant scrutiny. It works in both directions. I think I told you there was a girl who got on an El Al plane. I told you a story. This girl gets on an El Al plane, and she sits down, and the pilot, all of a sudden, one of the flight attendants, he comes over to her, says, "Excuse me, young lady, are you traveling alone?" She goes, "Yeah." El Al security gets all nervous. Yeah. So who was that little old lady back in the terminal? You were moving her bags around for about an hour and a half. Who was that? She goes, "I don't know, little old lady. She needed help. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong." He says, "Can I ask you a question? Are you religious?" She goes, "Yeah." He goes, "We thought so." Because only a religious girl would do something like that. And because you showed us you have so much class, we're moving you into first class for the entire flight. Oh, that you like, huh? Uh-huh. The fact that she made a kiddush Hashem and she gets a reward that even angels can't imagine, oh, that's nice. But first class, now that's, in the world to come, there's Gan Eden, and just above Gan Eden is the first class section of the plane. That's already worthwhile. Now, I would love to, the truth about the story. The girl, I was the steward. The girl was my wife. That's how we met. You don't really believe that, do you? I can't believe that. Would I be a steward on a plane? When did that take place? Right after I did helicopter rescue in Nevada? Yeah, that was me on the helicopter. I was the guy they lowered on the rope. Whenever the guy was on the ledge, I was the guy. My name was Kurt at the time, and I was the guy saying, "Don't worry, buddy, we're going to get you out of here. Don't worry, it's going to be okay." And I'm dangling on one hand. Yeah, no. So look, I don't even know what happened to that steward. I don't know if he ever became frum. I don't know what happened to him. The point is, we're being watched, and that's a Kiddush Hashem. I'll get to hold on, question for a second. I want to give you a few examples. First of all, the Rambam says that any time, now listen carefully, any time a person does not do an Aveira, you're tempted, and you don't do it, only because Hashem said not to do it. Nobody's watching you, nobody knows. At that moment, the terminology, Rabbi, is Hareza Kiddush Es Hashem. That's a Kiddush Hashem. So it doesn't have to be something dramatic in public. You refrained from doing something inappropriate simply because Hashem said not to do it. That's a Kiddush Hashem right there. Number one. Number two, there was a guy. I'm going to give you a couple of incidents, true incidents that happened. There was a guy in a group of yeshiva guys in Chicago. So they wanted to go on a road trip. They wanted to rent some sort of one of these, what do they call that? SUVs or whatever, camper. What do they call something? So there was a guy, RV. So they went out to there's some little hick town outside of Chicago where they were renting it. So the guy walked in, and the guy says to him, "Okay, you need 3 pieces of identification." So the guy says, "Well, I don't have. I only have 1 or 2, whatever it was." So the guy says, "Well, you need 3. You need 3." So the guy says, and he's a yeshiva guy, says, "I don't have." So the guy looks at him for a second. He says, "Roll up your sleeve." So he goes, "What?" He goes, "Roll back your sleeve." So he rolls up his sleeve, and the guy looks. He goes, "Oh, you got those marks on your arm. The tefillin marks were still there on his arm." He says, "Oh, you got those marks on. You don't need the identification. You're good." And he gave it to him. Right? Now, just imagine the story would have ended a little differently. You guys, let me see your arm. "Oh, you got those marks. Forget it. The last time I had a guy like you in here, he ended up suing us. I had such a hard time with him. Forget about it." So we're representing Yiddishkeit. We're representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 1 second. There was a case in Canada. A bank was broken into, and they burgled the safety deposit boxes. Got emptied out. There were 500 safety deposit boxes. So now the bank, there's some sort of insurance they have to take care of it. So they didn't know what to do, because you're going to ask somebody what was in your safety deposit box. Who knows what they're going to tell you. So there were actually 7 boxes that they didn't get to. They got to 493 boxes or 7 boxes. So they decided they're going to make a test to see if people are honest, basically honest. So they picked one of the 7 boxes randomly, called the person, it was a lady, and they said, "Could you tell us what items you had in your side? The bank was burgled, your box was cleaned out." Hers wasn't, but they saw what was in her box. So they said to her, "What was in your box?" She said, "Well, I had a pearl necklace, and I had $600, and I had this, that," and she named the items to the item without going over. And then based on that, the bank decided we could trust people, what they tell us in their safe deposit box. It turned out this woman, the woman they called was a frum woman, and it was in the papers in Canada, that the religious Orthodox Jewish woman, she named the items to the item, and it was a Kiddush Hashem. Now, the mistake people make is they think that the Kiddush Hashem is in front of non-Jews. But if you look at the pasuk says, "V'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael." The main Kiddush Hashem is when you're among Jews. When a guy comes to talk to you in shul, and you won't talk to him in shul, and people see you refuse to talk in shul, and you're davening well or you're learning well, that's the biggest Kiddush Hashem. The biggest Kiddush Hashem is what Jews see, not what other people see. There was a family that flew from Israel to America, and they had the woman needed treatment, some sort of oncology treatment, and they were staying at this family's house, and the name of the family was Klein. That's the people they were staying by. And they called, there was this at-home nurse who had to come to do this family from Israel, Goldman, whatever the name was, and she came to they called her up to come to the house to do the treatment. She was to take blood or to whatever it was involved. So she comes to the house, and she asks where the patient is. They said, here, it's me. She says, oh, she looks on the mailbox. Oh, you're Mrs. Klein. She goes, no, I'm actually visiting from Israel, and I need the treatment. So she turns to Mrs. Klein and she says, well, why is this family staying by you? She goes, well, they needed a place to stay. So this non-Jewish nurse, she looks at her and says, oh, I get it, you're Jewish. Meaning, this is the kind of behavior I expect to see from Jews. Because that's a Kiddush Hashem. There's a cop in New York, a non-Jewish cop. There's a Kolol guy, his car broke down on the highway. So this non-Jewish cop stops and he helps him fix his flat tire. So the guy says, why are you doing that? You're a policeman. Why are you helping me? He says, I was stuck in the snow when we had a blizzard. No one stopped to help me except Orthodox Jews. So I decided whenever I see an Orthodox Jew, I'm going to help. That's what he said. It's a Kiddush Hashem. That's the kind of behavior that's expected of us. Now, in Israel, it's even a higher level that's expected because we live among secular Jews, or not yet religious Jews, who are watching us and we're under heavy scrutiny. The minute you put on a yarmulke, you now have upgraded your responsibility level, whether you like it or not. Now, by the way, the option is, okay, so I'll take off my yarmulke. That's not an option. But the minute you're making a statement, and people expect to see you at a higher standard. I had a friend who was a kasher, a guy was actually a convert, but he became an Orthodox Jew, and he was in a bar throwing darts in a bar. And some girl comes up to him and she says, you're an Orthodox Jew, aren't you? He goes, yeah. He goes, what are you doing in a place like this? That's a chil Hashem. Well, I mean, what's she doing in a place like that? No, that's okay. For her, it's okay. But you understand, we're held to a higher standard. I have a friend who told me that his mother, who never really came to terms with his becoming a Baal Tshuva, so she was visiting him once. He was not living here, he was living in the United States, and she came over to visit, and she wasn't having any of it. And then one day on Shabbos, she said she'll go with him to shul. She'll go to shul. So she went to the shul, and she sat herself down in the front row of the women's section. And after davening, he came back to meet her. He said, how was davening? She goes, there were two guys sitting in the back row of the men's section, and the entire time they were talking about the Super Bowl. Your people are no better than ours. Now, she's obviously got an axe to grind, and if it wouldn't have been that, she would have found something else. But we're not looking to give her that. We don't want to give them the excuse. And that's a chil Hashem. Besides being an avera to talk in shul about the Super Bowl, that's an avera. That's a chil Hashem. That's a classic chil Hashem. I had one more example. Yeah, we had a guy here at Ohr Somayach. The guy at Ohr Somayach who was diving in a shul. People were answering their cell phones. This guy wasn't even from yet. He saw he was diving in a shul, and people in the middle of diving were answering their cell phones. And so he said to one of the rabbis, I guess they don't really believe in what they preach. That's a tremendous chil Hashem. Besides the ramifications that this guy may because of that be turned off of Yiddishkeit for good. So we have to be very, very, very careful in our behavior. Our behavior has to be, it's a responsibility, and we are being, like that girl on the plane, we're being watched. Now, I want to show you a Rashi here.
How does like some actions in the community, which like some people, like, not that they're common actions, but like, okay, yeah, they happen often, like throwing stones at cars who are coming by, like that seems to me very clearly Hilul Hashem, to the people who are in the cars, to the people who are on the streets, who are walking by.
Absolutely,
and it's like an accepted practice.
It's not an accepted practice. It is anybody with any sort of sensitivity to halacha, including the biggest poskim, say you are absolutely not allowed to throw stones at cars on Shabbos. The question is why. But there are always in every group, people have to realize just because somebody has a beard and payas, doesn't mean that they're pious and righteous. And generally, it's young teenagers who are out on the street, and they're not listening to anybody. They have been already condemned by their own. Listen, there are protests where they set garbage in Mea Shearim, they set garbage. The Rabbanim have come out and said, don't do that. But you're always going to get people who can't be controlled. And what happens is, one guy who does it, or two guys who do it, and that's a reflection on the whole community. All of a sudden, the whole community is, here, he just had in Crown Heights. There's one Jewish guy who did a horrible thing, because there was one guy in a wheelchair in Crown Heights, one of the black members of Crown Heights, who in a wheelchair said something to him. The guy assaulted him in the wheelchair. That was all over the news. So the black community then said the Jews were going to, one Jew did something wrong. Now all of a sudden all the Jews are condemned. That's always the way it looks. So you get one bad apple, but nobody looks at the good. Nobody talks about the good things. Every medical referral agency in Israel is being run by Orthodox Jews. Every chesed operation in the hospitals where they bring food to everybody without distinguishing between religious and not religious is all being run by Orthodox Jews. That they don't splash over the newspapers. Only when Orthodox Jew steps out of line, that makes the news. That makes the news. And it's a terrible chil Hashem. It's a terrible chil.
And I was more definitely in the news they blow it out of proportion, but I've seen it with my own eyes, and
Yeah.
a whole group, 15 little kids
Yeah.
who are doing something like this, and there's tons of adults on the street who are walking by and don't say anything. And
Because the adults on the street who are not the parents can't do anything about it. First of all, you do say
is it not
something.
like a little Hashem for them not to say anything?
So who said they don't? Sometimes you do say, but how can you control kids? You can't touch them. You can't do anything. You get arrested and put in jail if you touch them. I've seen kids doing things. I said to kids, they can ignore you. They can ignore you. And some people say, where are their parents? Honestly, your parents knew where you were every second of every day of your life. You know, these people are people. And people, always the bad looks much bigger than all, it outweighs all the good. Okay, I just want to show you one last point here. If you take a look at Rashi, the Rashi is on 680. It says velosechalalu. The left column of Rashi on 680, left column, last 5 lines. Okay, see that Rashi? Okay, 4 lines from the bottom. If you find it, please show the person next to you. 680, left column, 4 lines from the bottom. Last 2 words of the line. So we're talking about giving up your life. Ukeshehu moser atzmo, when a person gives himself over to be killed, not do the avera, yimsor atzmo almanas lamus. He should actually be willing to die. Shekol hamoser atzmo almanas hanes. If you're willingly allowing yourself to be killed, but you're hoping for a miracle, ein osin lones, the miracle won't happen. But if you're not hoping for the miracle, then the miracle could happen. That means when the guy pulls the Jew over, he says, "Okay, we're gonna push you off a cliff now if you don't worship idols." The Jew says, "Well, so be it." And he's hoping for the miracle. When he's pushed off the cliff, the miracle won't happen. If he's not hoping for the miracle, that means 100% willing to die, then the miracle could happen. Why? So the answer is like this. By the way, being willing to die hoping for a miracle is a very good level. It's a very high level, just that the miracle won't take place, but he's doing the mitzvah. He's willing to die. The answer is because the most basic drive any human being has is to be alive, to stay alive. Survival. Somebody who's hoping for the miracle means he's doing something natural. He's willing to give up his life, but he is still within the framework of the natural world. I want to live. I don't want to die. And he's hoping for the miracle. A miracle goes beyond nature. So if you're hoping for beyond nature, you yourself have to transcend nature. The step above nature is the person who's actually willing to die 100%. That means he has no thought whatsoever of staying alive. Now you've transcended nature. Now the miracle could happen, which transcends nature. And by the way, it's got to be 100%. It can't be, okay, I have no thoughts of the miracle. Did you hear me? I have no thoughts of the miracle. No, that means you are thinking about the miracle. It means you're absolutely willing to die. I'm giving up my life. Then the next could happen. Okay, any last questions on that? Anybody have any questions? Okay, you envious of me being a Kohen people. It was nice to see you today.